whispers through the trees. Bats whisper through the eaves. Your mind's whispers are full of fear, and I whisper in your ear. I am called the Whispering Man, and you're listening to Ghost Story. This is a story that made the rounds with a group of friends of mine a few years back. I've never known whether to believe it or not. Here it is. You can be the judge. There was this group of young people, recent college grads mostly, who lived near each other in a northwestern city. I knew one of the guys pretty well. His name was Justin. This group were all single and had known each other since college. 3 of the group were girls, and they shared an apartment together. Whenever the guys would come over to hang out, the girls would always warn them about their landlady. She's really weird, they'd say, really different. When pressed, the girls could not quite put their finger on what was so different about this landlady, but they were very serious when they told the guys to steer clear. The problem wasn't that their landlady was nasty or unfair. It was that she kept trying to become part of their group, even though they were all in their early 20s and she was well past 60. She liked to insert herself in any activity the group was doing. If they were having a game night or watching a movie together, she would create some excuse to knock on their door and start asking questions. How was the apartment? Do you have the rent for next month, whether it was due or not? Annoying little things like that. And on top of it all, she was very flirty with the guys. This made them extremely uncomfortable. They didn't want to hurt her feelings, but after all, she was well past 60. One night, the landlady came down to the girls' apartment and wouldn't leave. She was talking, dominating the conversation, and then she said, right out of the blue, "Well, you know, I'm a witch." The kids all laughed because they thought it was a joke, but the landlady said, "No, really, I'm a real witch. I cast spells, I belong to a coven, and everything." The guys in the group thought, well, this is different. Even if they didn't entirely believe the old lady, they resolved to have an open mind. But one of the girls, a girl named Linda, laughed, and it was a harsh laugh. You could tell right away that the landlady was offended. She looked over at Linda and said, "You think I'm fibbing?" Linda immediately recognized her mistake. She realized she hurt her landlady's feelings, and it would be better for everyone if she just apologized. So she did. She assured the landlady in her most soothing voice, "Oh, I believe in witches. I believe you are one. I believe you," she said. You could tell by the way the landlady was looking at Linda that she wasn't buying it. She was pretty pissed off, and they knew for sure things were bad when the landlady just got up and left without saying a word. She might have mumbled something about the rent being due next week at the doorway, but that was all. Justin, the guy I knew fairly well, was kind of dating this Linda at the time, and as I say, this group all hung out together. Everyone had dated everyone else at some point. None of it was very serious, but Linda and Justin were on and off serious and had dinner plans the following week. Then, Linda suddenly took violently ill. She grew worse and began missing work. This went on for 2 or 3 weeks until finally she landed in the hospital. The diagnosis was severe anemia. She was in the hospital for almost a month, and for most of that time she was very coy with Justin about what was wrong. He tried to give her privacy, but finally he couldn't stand not knowing. He went to her room and demanded to know what was wrong. He feared the worst, but he cared for her, and not knowing was driving him crazy. She was embarrassed, but she told him anyway. Justin was important to her, too. It was about her period. Linda had started normally weeks ago, but then it just didn't stop. Her flow had been going steady for a solid month, and it was heavy, and her cramps were much, much worse than normal. Linda was in so much pain it induced nausea, and the nausea was making it impossible for her to keep food down. The doctors were trying all kinds of therapies to get her cycle back on track, but nothing seemed to work. When Linda told Justin all this, she asked him a favor, a big favor. Linda was convinced the landlady was responsible. She was convinced that she was the victim of a hex. She asked Justin to go talk to the landlady about it, but Justin was very confused. Linda was always the most level-headed member of their group. Now she believed in hexes? It didn't make sense. But it was obvious to him that she needed him to do this. She needed an explanation as much as he did, even a crazy one. So he agreed. He would talk to the landlady. Justin went to the girls' building and knocked on the door marked manager. The landlady opened it and beamed at the sight of him. She was instantly flirtatious and fluttery, asking Justin how he was and if he'd been working out, that kind of thing. She liked to wear her hair in braids, and she twirled one of them, biting it suggestively. Honestly, Justin was a little put out by all of this. It was kind of gross, but he'd promised Linda he would talk to this woman, so he got to the point. He asked her if she'd put a hex on Linda. The landlady looked at him steadily. She tossed a braid over her shoulder. "What if I did?" she asked. "Well," Justin said carefully, "that would be a pretty shitty thing to do. The important thing is, Linda thinks that's what happened, and she sent me here to find out what we can do to make it right." The old woman thought for a while. Then she dropped her voice to a whisper and said, "Well, you could have dinner with me." Justin was expecting a lot of things, but he wasn't expecting that, and he did not respond well. He turned without a word and marched off to his car. He was pretty angry. He was feeling manipulated. He sat in the driver's seat to cool off, and after 5 minutes, he began to reconsider. One date? How bad could it be, he thought. After all, it was all for Linda. He was still sitting in his car, mulling things over, when he got a text from one of the other girls in the group. Linda had taken a turn for the worse. She said Justin should come to the hospital right away. Between the lines, her message was clear. Justin should come ready to say goodbye. Now, he knew he had no choice. Justin ran back to the landlady's apartment and apologized. He fell all over himself, explaining that he was just out of a relationship. That was a lie, and that he had reacted terribly to her suggestion. And would she please come to dinner with him? The landlady positively glowed at this. She scolded him for marching off like he did, but you could tell she had no intention of saying no. And as they made plans for a date the next night, Justin said, "And you'll take care of Linda, right?" All the landlady would say was, "Let's see how our date goes." The next day, Justin received word that Linda's condition appeared to have stabilized. He went to see her, and she was sitting up in bed, looking a little less pale. She asked about the landlady, and he told her everything. The date, her manner, everything. Justin's face fell, and Linda could tell what he was thinking, that he was going to have to do something thoroughly unpleasant to help her. She perked up then and said, "Here, I have something for you." She went to a drawer in her nightstand and came out with a simple pendant, just a dark stone on a silver chain. She put it around his neck and smiled. "For luck," she said. The next evening, Justin did his best to put on a show for the old lady. He wore a tie, he held the door for her, and he took her to a restaurant he couldn't really afford. She was practically drunk on the attention and on all the wine. After a couple of bottles, Justin drank little of it. She suggested they go back to her place. His heart sank, but he knew what he had to do. He ground his teeth, thought of Linda, and agreed. The landlady's apartment was a hoarder's hovel that smelled of cat piss. Whether she was a real witch or not, she clearly thought she was. There were little altars and trinkets everywhere. There were whole cabinets of bizarre plants and herbs. Justin even thought he saw a bottle marked Eye of Newt. It would have been ridiculous if it hadn't been so disgusting. The lady wasn't much of a housekeeper. She said something about getting more wine, and Justin took a seat on a filthy couch. While she was gone, he sent a quick text to his friends, thinking he might yet escape his fate if Linda had improved. He waited, but no messages came back to him. Time passed. Too much time for fetching a bottle of wine and a couple of glasses. Finally, Justin got up and checked the kitchen, only to find it empty except for 2 cats that looked at him disapprovingly. Then, he heard his name spoken from down a darkened hall off the kitchen. He looked down to the end of the hall and saw the flicker of candlelight coming through an open doorway. He walked slowly, like a condemned man toward the light. He came to the doorway and discovered the landlady's bedroom. She'd done it up like a ridiculous boudoir photo set, with candles everywhere, rose petals on the bed, and the coup de grace, the landlady herself, completely naked, stretched out on the bed before him. She reached out a bony hand. "Come on," she said. What could he do? Justin took off his clothes and climbed in next to her. Everything about her disgusted him. Her flesh was loose and clammy, and her hands were freezing. She smelled of cats and sickly sweet perfume. He wasn't sure how he was going to do this, but somehow he managed an erection and mounted her, closing his eyes and trying to think of Linda. But lying on this old bat was like lying on top of a cold slab of beef. And to make it worse, she began to breathe excitedly with a phlegmy rasp in her throat. She even coughed once, sending a thin shower of spray all over Justin's face. She didn't apologize or even seem to notice. He just gritted his teeth and kept going. Her raspy breathing grew more intense. Justin kept his eyes closed. Then he heard something different in her breathing. He looked at her. Her eyes were bulging and her lips were turning purple. Oh God, Justin thought, she's having a heart attack. The old woman arched her back. Rather than passion, there was a look of terror across her face. And Justin said, "Are you okay?" But she did not answer. She could not answer, because just then, a cockroach the size of a mouse crawled out of her mouth. Justin leapt off of her and backed up across the room. He knocked over some candles, cursed, and hurriedly batted out the flames before the whole room caught fire. And when he looked back at the bed, he saw the old woman convulsing and shaking. More roaches were pouring out of her mouth, out of her nose, ears, everywhere. And then, as if that wasn't enough, a giant bullfrog struggled to free itself from the old woman's mouth. And as it crawled out onto her flabby breasts, she convulsed one last time and was still. Justin ran. He threw on his clothes, left the apartment, and got to his car. He was shaking, confused, terrified. He started the engine and just drove, going nowhere. Then he got a message from Linda, finally responding to his earlier text. She was feeling much better, and she urged him to come up to the hospital. He drove there extra fast and ran up to Linda's room. The group was all there, but he asked them to give him and Linda some privacy. They could tell something had happened, so they abided. Linda looked at him with a wise, mysterious smile. She patted the bed next to him. "What's on your mind?" she asked. Justin sat and told her everything. Linda simply nodded through the story, ever-changing expression, even though he didn't spare her any of the gory details. He told her of the roaches and the frog and the surety of the old woman's death, and she just nodded. "It was all so freaky," Justin said. "I mean, what could possibly cause that? Bugs crawling out of a person? It doesn't make any sense, does it?" He looked up at Linda and was met with a look of utter contentment. Had her eyes always been so dark? He couldn't remember. Now her eyes looked black and deep as he gazed into them, and he felt all the panic and fear in him ebb away. She took his hand. "It's all right," Linda said. But not willing to let go of his questions, Justin said, "But how can that happen? How can a person be filled with insects?" Linda smiled and said, "She dabbled in witchcraft, didn't she? All kinds of things can go wrong. I should know. I've been studying about it non-stop the whole time I've been in the hospital." Justin blinked in surprise. He looked past her and noticed, for the first time, the stack of old and dusty books on her night table. Why had he never noticed them before? And then he remembered the dark stone pendant around his neck. It was the only thing he didn't take off during his tryst with the old woman. And then he looked back at Linda, who smiled. The stone grew hot against his chest, and he discovered that he could not move. At that moment, he knew he was completely, utterly under her power. But he also knew he kind of liked it.